wabarakatuh. In the name of Allah, the most beneficent and the most merciful, I'd like to thank Allah for giving us the opportunity to commemorate the martyrdom of Imam Husayn alayhi salam in these dire times. Even though the lovers of Imam Husayn alayhi salam can't be together on Farshiyaza physically, we are together on it virtually. The event of Karbala is so tragic and horrific that it has been mourned by the beings on earth and heavens alike. It is evident that the atrocities committed against the Ahl al-Bayt al-Nabuwa, which started from the Shahadat of Bibi Sayyida Salamullah Alaiha, continued to Karbala and beyond. We are honored to have Maulana Syed Bilal Rizvi Sahab Qibla with us. It is very early currently where he is right now, and yet still he has agreed to recite the majalis for the first 10 Ashra. For the health and safety and overall well-being of the Maulana, can we please recite salawat on the Prophet's family?
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد
وعجل فرجهم. May I please request Ali Rajani to come forth and recite some verses of the Holy Quran. Thank you. For Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون وسواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون صدق الله العلي العظيم.
ما شاء الله ما شاء الله. اللهم صل على
على
محمد
محمد
وعلى
وعلى
محمد
محمد
وعجل
وعجل.
فرجهم. May I please request Abis to come forth and recite the salam, please. For Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat.
اللهم صل على
محمد
محمد
وعلى
وعلى
محمد
محمد
وعجل
وعجل
فرجهم.
فرجهم.
مولا مقتل میں سر کو جھکائے لشکر اکبر پہ تنہا کھڑے ہیں دھیمے دھیمے ٹپکتے ہیں آنسو ہائے سویرا کا خط پڑھ رہے ہیں بولے کیا میں جواب اس کا دوں بولے کیا میں جواب اس کا دوں ہائے سغرا بتا کیا لکھوں ہائے سغرا بتا کیا لکھوں ہائے سغرا بتا کیا لکھوں میں تو پردیس میں لٹ گیا اپنی لشکر کو میں رو چکا تیرا بابا غریب ہو گیا تیرا بابا غریب ہو گیا اور اس کے سوا کیا لکھوں ہائے صغرا بتا کیا لکھوں ہائے صغرا بتا کیا لکھوں انیا میرا گھر لے گئی میرا لشک کے جگر لے گئی میرا نور نظر لے گئی میرا نور نظر لے گئی اور اس کے سوا کیا لکھوں ہائے صغرا بتا کیا لکھوں ہائے صغرا بتا کیا لکھوں ہائے صغرا وہ بھائی تیرا جس نے تجھ سے تھا وعدہ کیا کھا گئی اس کو کرب و بلا کھا گئی اس کو کرب و بلا اور اس کے سوا کیا لکھوں ہائے صغرا بتا کیا لکھوں ہائے صغرا بتا کیا لکھوں پیارے تو نے ہے جس کو لکھا گھٹنیاں بھی جو نہ چل سکا ہاں وہ اصغر بھی اب نہ رہا ہاں وہ اصغر بھی اب نہ رہا اور اس کے سوا کیا لکھوں ہائے صغرا بتا کیا لکھوں ہائے صغرا بتا کیا لکھوں
محمد وآل محمد صلوات
اللهم صل
صل
على
على
محمد
محمد
وعلى
وآل
محمد جل فرجه ماشاءاللہ ماشاءاللہ بہت اچھا پڑھا حافظ بہت اچھا پڑھا ماشاءاللہ ماشاءاللہ. May I please request Maulana Syed Bilal Rizvi to come forth and recite the majlis for Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat.
اللهم صل على
محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجهم.
الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الأول بلا أول كان قبله والآخر بلا آخر يكون بعده والحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد
اللهم صل على محمد
وعلى
محمد وعجل فرجه.
اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على صاحب الدعوة النبوية والصولة الحيدرية والإسمة الفاطمية والحلم الحسنية والشجاعة الحسينية والإبادة السجادية والمآثر الباقرية والآثار الجعفرية والعلوم الكاذمية والحجج الردبية والجود التقوية والنقابة النقبية والحيبة الأسكرية والغيبة الإلهية. اللهم عجل فرجا وسهل مخرجا. أما بعد فقد قال الإمام علي بن موسى الرضا يا ابن الشبيب إن كنت باكيا على شيء فابكي للحسين بن علي صدق مولانا علي ibn Musa al-Rida. Allahumma salli ala.
اللهم صل
صل
على
على
محمد وعلى
محمد وعلي
محمد
محمد.
وعجل فرجهم.
وعجل فرجهم.
The moon for the month of Muharram for the 1442nd year after the migration of the Prophet has been sighted. And we've commenced our year with the commemoration of the martyrdom of Sayyid al-Shuhada. You see, when a person, he gives his life in the way of Allah, he is called a shaheed. But the sacrifice of Imam al-Husayn is that not only was he called a shaheed and a martyr upon his sacrifice, but he was called Sayyid al-Shuhada, the master of the martyrs. Within this word shaheed in the Arabic language, you find that there is a literal sense that shows the profound nature of this word. For a shaheed in its literal sense means somebody who gives testimony, somebody who bears witness, somebody who gives shahada. That's why a person, when he declares his testimony of faith, when he says, La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah, Aliyun Waliyullah, we say he is giving shahada. But the question is in what way is Imam al-Husayn the master of those who bear witness? You find one element of this is within this dunya, and the second element of this is upon the day of judgment. In the way within this dunya, you find Imam al-Husayn, he bore witness to the path of a haqq. And upon that path, he gave his sacrifice and he was a witness. But upon the day of judgment, you find Allah will use him as his hujjat and his proof and as a witness against the ummah of that time, that despite the call of the grandson of Rasulullah, you find the people of that time, they reject God's divine grace, the divine guide upon this earth. You see, the month of Muharram has begun, and all of those worries, all of that multiplicity within our life has made place for the path of unity. And that unity is found within one name, and that name is the name of Aba Abdullah. You see, when the moon of Muharram is sighted, it's as if the atmosphere, it changes completely. Although within this year, we're not able to gather in congregation because of the situation of COVID across the world. But you find that Allah within this has a hikmah and a divine will and a divine wisdom within it. Because in other years, you find when we would go towards the Husayniyas and we would go towards the Imam Barghas, there would be a dichotomy that's created, that the Imam Bargha was seen as the makan and the place of mourning. Whereas within our homes, you find we would continue our routine lives. But this year, within the wisdom of Allah, you find our homes have become the Husayniyas. Our homes have become that place where we remember Sayyid al-Shuhada. This dichotomy of the place of Azah and the place of your normal life, it's changed, and it's one reality within this month, that you find that every place is the place of the Azah of Sayyid al-Shuhada. The second wisdom within this Muharram, where we aren't able to gather, is that many of us, we haven't been given the opportunity to go towards Karbala. But you find the hadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, they say, Man zarana min ba'id, kaman zarana min qareeb. That the one who does our ziyarah from afar is like the one who does our ziyarah up close. That although there is no comparison to being in the land of Karbala, but you find the reality of al-insanul kamil and the perfect man is that the one who does a ziyarah, whether they are up close or far away, you find that visitation, it reaches them. And in this way, although we can't go to the haram of Sayyid al-Shuhada within this year, our heart has become the haram of Husayn.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah.
The hadith, it says of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq,
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى
محمد
وعجل فرجه.
It says Al-Qalbu Haramullah. Fala tuskin haramallah ghayrallah. The Imam says the heart is the sanctuary of Allah, and do not settle anyone in this heart other than Allah. You see, when you go towards the ziyarah, you say within ziyarah, before you enter the shrine of Sayyid al-Shuhada, you ask for idnu dukhul, you ask for permission to enter. You see, when somebody is dead, you read Fatiha over them. But when somebody is alive and bearing witness, you ask for permission to enter. And you say, oh Allah, inna nakifu ala hadha al-maqam, that we are standing at the spot which is baytun min buyutik, which is a house from amongst your houses, O Allah. You find each of these shrines, whether in Najaf or Medina or Karbala, each of them is the haram of Allah. The Imam says that al-qalbu haramullah, that the heart is the sanctuary of Allah, the one within this time when he can make his heart the sanctuary of Sayyid al-Shuhada, whether he can go to the mosque or not go to the mosque, you find that halatul aza and that state of mourning, it remains within him. You see, this is not the first time in human history that congregating as a community and mourning for Sayyid al-Shuhada has been prohibited. No, there's many times in history that this occurred, whether it was under Al-Mutawakkil in Baghdad or the caliphs of Baghdad, or whether it is in Soviet Russia when there was a secularist system that didn't allow the preaching of religion. You know, I myself, I've heard from people that when they went towards Moscow, there's a community of the Shia over there that after every ceremony for Imam al-Husayn, they would take their hands and they would do matam like this very softly with two fingers. So that scholar who went over there, he asked them that, why do you do this? They replied that during the Soviet rule, we were not allowed to have congregations and majalis. So what we would do is that 4 or 5 of us, we would gather together, we would whisper the masayib towards each other, and then we would do matam like this with our hands underneath our shirt so people couldn't see. You see, there have been challenges in human history where the communal gathering of Sayyid al-Shuhada wasn't being able to take. And although I realize these situations are much different than what we are facing today, but you find that if the congregations aren't there to mourn for Husayn, you find it has been the way of human history that the home, it becomes the place of azah. I remember a story, there was a lady in Baghdad. She said to her children that let's go to the outskirts of Baghdad. The children, they said, oh mother, do you not know the state of Baghdad right now? She said, no, this day is a different day. This is the day of Ashura. She takes her children with her. When she takes her children with her, you find that she goes over there and she says to her children, oh my children, on this day Husayn was killed. He had a son by the name of Ali Akbar. And in this way, she goes through all of the masa'ib. After she goes through all of the masa'ib, you find that she speaks to her children. She says, has any of you remembered the musibah? Now you recite it towards me. You see, in this manner, the azab Sayyid al-Shuhada, in all circumstances, it continues. Although the form it may adapt, the haqiqat and the reality, it remains. And what is the reality of the mourning of Sayyid al-Shuhada? You see, it's strange that the human being, his entire life, he seeks to avoid gham. He seeks to avoid grief and sadness. When you ask that youth that why do you go to university, he spends the age of 18 to 22 struggling. Why? So he doesn't have to face sorrow later in his life. The person who spends his life staying away from those things which destroy his health, you say to him that why are you doing this? He says, it's because I don't want to feel any sorrow or difficulties later in my life when I become elder. But you find the gham of Sayyid al-Shuhada is different. It's not that you avoid it, but you spend your time anticipating it. That when the day of Ghadir it comes, you say 12 more days until Muharram. When Ramadan it comes, you say 3 more months until Muharram. When Muharram it finishes, you say, oh Husayn, we wait for next Muharram. So what is it that is different about this sorrow? Every other sorrow, you find it breaks the peace within the heart of a human being. But this is that sorrow which builds peace within the human being, because every other sorrow is of the nature of this world. You see, the nature of this world is that this is alam al-kawn wal-fasad, that this is the world of being and destruction. There is no permanence within this world. One day you have health, the next day you may not have health. One day you have enough sustenance, the next day you may not have sustenance. There is no permanence, there's no baqa within this world. But when you find that sorrow is of a divine nature, when that sorrow is for the one who has made himself fana fillah, the one who has absorbed himself in Allah, you find that sorrow is one which brings peace. That sorrow is an external manifestation of the ayah from the Quran, Ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub, that from the remembrance of Allah, verily the hearts they find rest. And that rest, it comes from the tears for Aba Abdullah. That, you know, we have tradition after tradition about the tears. You know, Sheikh Abbas al-Qummi, he wrote a famous maqtal and he called it Nafasul Mahmoom. You know, there's a tradition of Imam al-Sadiq where he says, Nafasul Mahmoom lana al-mukhtam li dulmina tasbih. He says Nafasul Mahmoom. Of course, nafas in Arabic means breath. When a person, he has sorrow, you see that person, even his breathing, it becomes heavy from the anxiety. Imam al-Sadiq says, even that breathing of sorrow for the dhulm and oppression which we Ahlul Bayt faced is the tasbih of Allah. وَحَمُّهُ ibadah. And that sorrow in our sorrow is the ibadat of Allah. You know, Shaykh Abbas al-Qummi, based on this tradition, Nafasul Mahmoom, he writes his Maqtal Nafasul Mahmoom. And within it, in the first chapter, he writes down 40 hadith about the fawaid of mourning for Sayyid al-Shuhada and the fawaid of sending la'an upon the killers of Sayyid al-Shuhada. You know, within this tradition, there is a tradition recorded that Rasulullah, he says to Janab Zahra salamullahi alayha,
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad
he
wa
says,
ali Muhammad wa ajjal
Ya Fatima, kullu ain baqiyatun yawm al-qiyamah illa ain baqat ala Musab al-Husayn. He says, O Fatima, that upon the day of judgment, every eye shall cry, O Fatima, except for that eye which cries over the musibah of Aba Abdullah. You know this line, Kullu ain baqiyatun yawm al-qiyamah illa, that every eye shall cry is only found in 2 hadith. The other hadith says that every eye shall cry except for 3. The first eye is which sheds tears from the khashya and the fear of Allah. The second eye, which won't cry on the day of judgment, is the one that lowers itself from haram. And the third eye, which won't cry on the day of judgment, is that eye which is awake in the ibadat of Allah. And the second tradition says that the only eye which will not cry is that eye which cries over the musibah of Husayn in this dunya. From this we understand that the tears for Sayyid al-Shuhada, in the way these 3 things are ibadah, tears from the fear of Allah, tears from staying awake for the ibadat of Allah, that is ibadat. You find that these tears for Sayyid al-Shuhada in the same way are ibadah. You know, Ayatollah Bahjat, the famous scholar in Qom who was known for his mystical path, for being an arif billah, Ayatollah Bahjat has a line. He says in a lecture which is recorded within a book which was published by his office, he says that tears for Sayyid al-Shuhada are greater than the recitation of Salatul Layl. Now we all know about the fawaid of Salatul Layl. That Salatul Layl is that salat where Rasulullah would say that Allah says to the Prophet that if you want to reach Maqam al-Mahmud, Ya Rasulullah, if you want to reach that praiseworthy status, recite Salatul Layl. But over here, Ayatollah Bahjat says that tears for Sayyid al-Shuhada are afdal and greater than Salatul Layl. And the reason he gives is that Salatul Layl is a performance of the body. And the alamat and the sign of the acceptance of Salatul Layl is when tears, they begin to fall. Because tears are an action of the heart. When one cries for Sayyid al-Shuhada, you find this is purely an action of the heart. You see, the days of Muharram have begun, and this journey of Ishq has begun. And it is through this journey that the hearts, they soften. You see, this is a very important point. The heart, of course, the qalb within the Quran is the center of idrak and comprehension. And when the heart, it becomes hard, that heart is not able to take the divine grace and the divine blessings. That heart, it doesn't yearn towards ibadat when it becomes hard. Amir al-Mu'mineen says,
اللهم صل على محمد
محمد
وعلى
وآل
محمد وعجل
محمد
فرجك.
ما جفت الدموع إلا لقسوة القلوب وما قست القلوب إلا لكثرة الذنوب. He says that if you want to know what the sign of the hardening of the heart is, then it's the falling of tears. And the tears, they don't stop except for when the heart becomes hard. And the heart doesn't become hard except when the sins, they increase. You see, in the way a child is born, and the sign of the physical life of the child is crying. The moment the child, he doesn't cry upon his birth is the moment his lungs don't open. Allah within the birth of a human being showed, O human being, that in the way physical life doesn't begin until tears they fall, spiritual livelihood doesn't begin until tears they fall from your eyes. And the most potent of those tears are the tears for Aba Abdullah. And it is these tears that the famous companion of Imam al-Rida, Rayhan ibn Shabib, he saw the Imam pouring. You see, it's from the advice of Ayatollah Wahid Khurasani that on the first of Muharram, for every khatib to recite this tradition. It's stated one day that Rayhan ibn Shabib, he goes to Imam al-Rida, and he says, I saw the Imam, ra'aytuhu hazinan. I saw the Imam in a state of sorrow. I said, oh Master, why do you cry in this manner? The Imam says, oh Yabna Shabib, do you not know that the moon of Muharram has been sighted, oh Yabna Shabib? Then he says to the son of Shabib, Hal anta sa'imun? That are you fasting upon this day? Rayhan ibn Shabib says, no, I'm not fasting upon this day. Imam al-Rida says, Hada al-yawm, huwa al-yawm, alladhi da'a Zakariya rabbahu, wa qal wa habli min ladunka waliya. That the first of Muharram is that day that Zakaria, he made his dua that, oh Allah, give me a successor. And upon this day, وَهُوَ قَائِمٌ يُصَلِّي فِي الْمَحْرَابِ, that while he was standing praying within the Mahrab on the first of Muharram, Allah accepted the dua of Zakaria. Then after that, Imam al-Rida says, oh Yabna Shabib, it was a tradition amongst the Arabs that in the month of Muharram, fighting was prohibited within this month. But O son of Shabib, this is that month where the tradition was broken, when the ummah of the Prophet had gathered to kill the grandson of the Prophet, O Yabna Shabib. After that, he says to Yabna Shabib, He says, Yabna Shabib, in kunta bakiyan ala shayin fabki lil Husayn ibn Ali. He says, O son of Shabib, if you ever want to cry over anything, then cry over Husayn, O son of Shabib. Whether it's your sorrows, whether it's your own difficulties, in that moment, cry for Sayyid al-Shuhada. Imam al-Rida says, O son of Shabib, if you want to meet Allah on the day of judgment with no sins upon you, then go to that spot where Husayn was killed. And if you want to reach that status of closeness, then send la'an upon the killers of Husayn. And after that, Imam al-Rida, he says, O Yabna Shabib, when they killed my grandfather, innahu dhubiha kama yudbahul kabsh, that, oh Yabna Shabib, when they killed my grandfather, they slaughtered him in the way that they slaughter a sheep. You find Yabna Shabib, he says, oh my master, that did they give water to your grandfather? Because when you slaughter a sheep, you give that sheep water. Imam al-Rida says no. He says, did they sharpen the sword? Because when you slaughter an animal, you sharpen the sword. Imam al-Rida says, neither was the sword sharpened. Did they make sure no one else was watching? Because when you slaughter an animal, you turn everyone away. Imam al-Rida says, no, my aunt Zainab from 70 paces would watch. Was Shimar jalisun ala sadr al-Husayn. Shimar was sitting upon the chest of Husayn. Ibn Shabib, he says, oh my master, then why do you say this? Imam al-Rida, he says, O son of Shabib, understand that when you slaughter a sheep, there is no one to say, don't kill that animal. In the same way, there was no one to say that don't kill my grandfather Husayn on the day of Ashura. You see, this first day of Muharram, I haven't become the topic of our discussions, which is Ziyaratul Waritha. But the first day of Muharram is that day where we make the gham in our hearts begin to settle. That what is the sorrow of Sayyid al-Shuhada? You know, it's stated upon the deathbed of Imam al-Hasan,
Allahumma
Sayyid
salli ala
al-Shuhada
Muhammad
was
wa ala
crying
Muhammad
upon
wa
that moment. Imam al-Hasan, he looks at his brother. He says, Ya Aba Abdullah, atabki alayya? That, oh my brother Husayn, do you cry over me? Imam al-Hasan says, Abki alayk, that I cry over you, Ya Aba Abdullah. And he says, La yawmaka yawmak, Ya Husayn. There is no day like your day, O Husayn. After that, you find that each Imam, one after another, they would remember Sayyid al-Shuhada. But one of the most famous incidents is the incident of Imam al-Rida and Di'bal al-Khuzai. When Di'bal, he comes to Imam al-Rida, Imam al-Rida says, oh Di'bal, have you written something for my grandfather Husayn? Di'bal, he says that, yes, I've written something for you, O son of the Prophet. Imam al-Rida says, oh Di'bal, what have you written? Di'bal, he says, Madarisu ayatin khalat min tilawatin wa munzilu wahyin mukfirul arasati. He says that those houses where the Quran was recited and wahi and revelation would come, those houses have become empty. He says, Diyaru Ali wal Husayni wa Ja'far wa Hamzata wa Sajjadi dilta fanati. The house of Ali and Hussein and Ja'far and Hamza and Sajjad have become empty. And then he says those lines which break the heart. He says, Afatimu qumi yabnatil khair wandubi nujuma samawatin ala ardi falati. He says, O Fatima, stand and mourn over those stars which have fallen upon the plains of Karbala. And then after that, he says, وقبور بكوفان وأخرى بطيبة وأخرى بفخ نالها صلواتي وقبر ببغداد لنفس زكية. Dabil, he says that there is a grave in Kufa and there is a grave in Baghdad. At that point, Imam al-Rida says, "Oh Da'bal, can I finish your qasida?" Da'bal says, "Oh my master, it would be an honor." Imam al-Rida, he says, وَقَبْرٌ بِتُوسٍ يَا لَهَا مِن مُصِيبَةٍ. He says, "Oh Da'bal, know that there will also be a grave in Tus, and the musibah of that grave will be great, O Da'bal." Da'bal, he says, "Oh my master, whose grave will that be?" Imam al-Rida says, "I will be buried when there will be no one from my family." It's stated at that moment that a companion of the Imam, he comes. He says, "Oh my master, as you were reciting this, your sister Fatima had fallen upon the ground from mourning." I say, "Oh Fatima, ma'asuma al-qum," to hear about something and to see is different. You only heard about the martyrdom of your brother. I send my salams upon Zainab, who from Tilla'i Zainabiyya, from 70 paces she would watch, a shimmer would sit upon the chest of Abi Abdullah. You see, we've entered these nights of mourning, these nights that from the beginning of humanity to now, the remembrance of Husayn has been there. It's stated within the tafaseer of the ayat of the Quran, وَتَلَقَّ آدَمُ مِنْ رَبِّهِ كَلِمَاتٍ, that Adam, he received those words from Allah. Allam al-Majlisi in Bihar al-Anwar, he records that Adam, when he received these words, he said to Allah, "Anta Mahmud bihaqqi Muhammad, wa anta Ali bihaqqi Ali, wa anta Fatir bihaqqi Fatima, wa anta al-Muhsin bihaqqi al-Hasani wal-Husayn." He says, "Oh Allah, when I said each of these names, I didn't feel a sorrow like I did when I recited the final name, the name of Husayn." Jibreel comes down. Jibreel says, "Oh Adam, this is that grandson of the Prophet, Sayuqtalu ghariban faridan wahidan adshana." That this is that grandfather, this is that grandson of the Prophet Muhammad who will be killed alone while he was thirsty within the lands of Karbala. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين سيعلم الذين ظلموا أيّ منقلب ينقلبون. We raise our hands upon this day and we say, "Oh Allah, through the right of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, wherever the followers of Ahlul Bayt are in difficulty, help them. Wherever they're sick and healing, help them. Ya Allah, grant us the intercession of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. And we pray for the advancement of the world and for all those who are sick and ailing within the world. Inshallah, beginning tomorrow, we'll begin our series of discussions over the text of Ziyaratul Waritha and the inheritance of Sayyid al-Shuhada from each of the Anbiya mentioned within Ziyaratul Waritha. But tonight was the first night, and it is a tradition amongst many of the ulama, whether they are from the subcontinent or Iraq or Iran, that the first night is dedicated to the importance of the mourning of Sayyid al-Shuhada and the Masayib of Sayyid al-Shuhada. And with that said, رَبَّنَا تَقَبَّلْ مِنَّا إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. اللهم
صل على
محمد وآل
محمد.
محمد.
Please request Sajjad to come forward and recite the Noha. Thank you. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل
Husayn.
जाओ मेरे लाल तुम पे हर कदम रहे दुआ मेरी और साया खुदाए जुल जलाल। जाओ मेरे लाल تم پہ ہر قدم رہے دعا میری اور سایہ خدا ذوالجلال جا رہے ہو تم جو کہہ کے دین حق بچاؤں گا اماں آپ کی قسم میں خون میں نہاؤں گا اماں آپ کی قسم میں خون میں نہاؤں گا اب ہو جو بھی حال تم ہو پائے مال تم پہ ہر قدم رہے دعا میری اور سایہ خدا ذوالجلال جاؤ میرے لال جاؤ میرے لال تم پہ ہر قدم رہے دعا میری اور سایہ خدا ذوالجلال بچپنے میں جو کیا تھا وعدہ بابا جان سے وقت اب وہ آ گیا کفن تو سر سے باندھ لے وقت اب وہ آ گیا کفن تو سر سے باندھ لے دیکھ میرے لال دی کا ہے سوال کامیابیاں ہے تیرے ساتھ ہی اور سایہ خدا ذوالجلال جاؤ میرے لال جاؤ میرے لال تم پہ ہر قدم رہے دعا میری اور سایہ خدا ذوالجلال دے رہا ہے دین کبریا تمہیں صدا المدد حسین المدد شہ ہدا المدد حسین المدد شہ ہدا بے وطن حسین میرے دل کے چین ہم سفر تمہارے ساتھ ماں ہوئی اور سایہ خدا ذوالجلال جاؤ میرے لال جاؤ میرے لال تم پہ ہر قدم رہے دعا میری اور سایہ خدا ذوالجلال شان با وفا کے ہوں گے جس گھڑی قلم روئیں گے علم کے سائے میں تیرے حرم روئیں گے علم کے سائے میں تیرے حرم روئے گی وفا اور کربلا روئے گی فرات اور تشنگی اور سایہ خدا ذوالجلال جاؤ میرے لال جاؤ میرے لال تم پہ ہر قدم رہے دعا میری اور سایہ خدا ذوالجلال اکبر جواں جگر پہ کھائے گا سنا ماں کہے گی میرا چاند کھو گیا کہاں ماں کہے گی میرا چاند کھو گیا کہاں اس پہ نوحہ ہوں گے میری جاں میں بھی اور حسن بھی اور رسول بھی اور سایہ خدا ذوالجلال جاؤ میرے لال جاؤ میرے لال تم پہ ہر قدم رہے دعا میری اور سایہ خدا ذوالجلال اور محمد والے محمد صلی اللہ
اللہم صل
صل
علی
علی
محمد وعلی محمد وعجل
چلو
ماشاءاللہ ماشاءاللہ جزاک اللہ سجاد.
Can we finish off with the dua Imam Zamana?
Yep.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Allahumma kulli waliyaka
الحجة ابن
al-Hasan salawatuka alayhi wa ala abai في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرزك طوعا وتمتعهم فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى
محمد. Thank you very much, and we'll join again tomorrow at 6:20.
وزيادة بعد يا مزمل.
Is anyone else who's interested? Or Assalamu alaikum ya Abu Abdullah. Assalamu alaikum ya Rasulullah. Assalamu alaikum ya Amir al-Mu'minin. Assalamu alaikum ya Hasan al-Mustafa. Assalamu alaikum ya Sayyid al-Shuhada. Assalamu alaikum ya Imam Zain al-Abidin. Assalamu alaikum ya Imam Muhammad al-Baqir. Assalamu alaikum ya Imam Jafar al-Sadiq. Assalamu alaikum ya Musa al-Kazim. Assalamu alaikum ya Imam Ali Raza. Assalamu alaikum ya Muhammad al-Baqir. السلام عليك يا علي الذكي. السلام عليك يا حسن العسكري. السلام عليك يا إمام زمان. عجل الله تعالى فرجه وسهل الله تعالى مخرجه وزهورا.
اللهم صل على محمد
وعلى
وعلى
محمد.
محمد.